The real estate industry is the world's single largest contributor to climate change. At Fifth Wall, we're on a mission to help the industry eradicate its carbon emissions and build to zero.
Where will people live in 2050? Because it's this multivariable equation where a lot of the variables intersect with one another's in ways that are frankly probably hard to model out. But what are the major drivers of that? What are the non-intuitive ones that also collide with that output?
It's a great question. So let me get the obvious ones out of the way. We have been a nomadic species for 100,000 years, minus the last 4,000 or 5,000 years, right? So it is actually in our nature to move. Climate has historically been a huge driver. The climate only stabilized after the last ice age. So as you know, most of the human population lives in a certain latitudinal band, which scientists call the climate niche. And that niche is now shifting. So my argument is we will shift too. We flee from insecurity. So that also explains a lot of 20th century migrations, World War II, and partition of India and Pakistan, and civil wars around the world. But we're obviously just fundamentally seeking relative gains economically. The most recent census just came out, and Michigan is still losing people, right? By environmental logic, it should be gaining people, but that isn't priced in yet. It's still losing people to low tax states and sunny states and so forth. But then you've got remote work, right, which actually liberates people. Also, though, the fact is that this is a huge demographic thing, another surprise. So what's very different between the sort of the baby boomer generation, which had on average a higher fertility rate than we see today. So whereas in the past you would say, okay, well, eventually once people have children and settle down, they're going to want to buy an asset, have a home, that's going to be their equity, and they prefer stability in all aspects of life, and they sell out, as well politically and that kind of thing. Well, that's not going to happen anymore because you're dealing with 4 billion young people who don't have any children. So the home equity and the children, the two forces that generally conspire psychologically to make people sedentary and docile, don't really work in the 21st century, right? Global underclass revolt that has been brewing since the anti-globalization movement, Occupy Wall Street, the Arab Spring, and so forth. Political polarization there's no particular reason for that to go away if people don't have one fixed asset or home that they seek to secure, and that they don't have children who are their number one priority who they focus on. There's no scenario at all where people are not moving. Like, I think that people will move 6 or 7 times over the course of their lives. And so understanding where people are going to be is obviously so fundamental to thinking about our economic strategy and planning, and where the geography of our economy, and of course the geography of real estate. If you don't know where people are, how are you going to know where to build?
The stage is set for people to move more, faster, more frequently, and in a more in a way where they don't grow root. And it sounds like also one of the big intersecting variables is how imminent the negative consequences of climate change are, and how that kind of expedites that process. Absolutely. Can you talk about that?
The Western United States is already in a multi-decade mega drought. It's not a prediction, it's already happening, right? And that's all over the world. Large parts of the Middle East are unlivable. Much of South Asia is becoming unlivable. The number of zero-day events that are happening in India and Brazil and African countries, are more frequent. So there will have to be, despite the sovereign borders that restrain us, there will inevitably be more migration. So I look around the world and I look at the places people will be leaving and the places that will be absorbing people. Some are off the beaten track. And there are places in the world that have fast growing populations, not least because they are climate propitious and they have good governance and economic management. So Kazakhstan's population is growing. Canada's population is growing. England's population. So if you look at British immigration policy, it's as if Brexit never happened. It's more liberal today in 2021 than it was in, say 2015, because they realized that they were hemorrhaging talent and capital and industry as a result of Brexit. So I believe that one way or the other, every country in the world is going to come around to realizing that they need people in this war for talent, and particularly the countries that are climate oases, that are climate propitious, are simultaneously the ones that are depopulating. So we have the most perverse and quite frankly, immoral, sort of hypocritical discrepancy in the world today. You have, all the young people trapped in unlivable countries, and all the places that are turning green and becoming more livable because of climate change are depopulating because they're aging and people are dying. And we ultimately have to correct that mismatch.
If you were to think about that, there's going to be this geographic and demographic reshuffling of the deck. Where is there the most daylight between where we are today and what 2050 will look like on the negative side?
The models are fairly clear around what temperature rise is going to do through the intermediate second order effects to coastal areas, right? Whether it's Florida or elsewhere. And don't forget, it's not really just sea level rise. It's just the tropical storms, the typhoons. And one of the things that I've looked at is, how quickly or not do geographies recover in terms of their asset value in their real estate markets after these inclement events. And the answer is they're not particularly resilient. Now, there are anomalies to that, like Miami, Florida, right, where the right signals on tax policy and attracting new businesses, investment, can actually increase the population despite the long-term outlook of a place. But overall, places that are inland, places that are higher elevation, places that obviously have clean air, that are proximate to freshwater supply, proximate to agriculture, and that are affordable, are the places that, if you filter for all of those factors by if a sort of holistically rational person is not thinking only about climate or only about affordability or only about air quality, but all of those things that we should think in that way, those are the geographies that people ought to gravitate toward. I grew up in New York, not far from you, in upstate New York, because the American family size has been shrinking, it was difficult for my parents to actually sell their home in northern Westchester because families today don't have as many kids. But along came this thing called COVID-19, and suddenly people said, oh, I'm going to move to the suburbs and do remote work. If they'd known COVID was coming and that remote work would suddenly become a thing, they would have actually, sold their house at a 50% markup. Instead, they actually took a 30% haircut selling before the pandemic. So it's just that story reminds you that there's a lot of factors driving things. But if you want to think from a climate point of view, the way we should think, because ultimately, if you're buying an asset, investing for the long term, then you do need to be thinking out to 2040 and 2050. Then you got to take climate into account.